Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Marlene Siegel, who is an international speaker and an innovator of integrative veterinary medicine. Her practice, Pasco Veterinary Medical Center in Lutz, Florida, offers the widest array of alternative therapies and detoxification services in the country. She developed her own raw pet food company and supplements, Evolve. Oh, you're going to have to help me pronounce this. Evo Love Raw. EvoLoveRaw.com. More about that to come. Passionate about education, she has online programs for pet parents and veterinarians to teach integrative vet medicine. She's launching Spas Family Wellness in 2021, detox centers for pets and their parents. Welcome to the show, Dr. Siegel.
Hi, I'm so excited to be with your audience.
I know our listeners want to know ultimately what they can do to extend their pets' lives. Pets are a big part of our life. So tell us first kind of your story. Before we get to that, I want to hear your story. What made you kind of convert from traditional medicine to more integrative veterinary medicine?
Thank you. And I think it's an important story because it's a story that all of us can relate to in our own special way. So I was practicing medicine for over 20 years already, have 2 daughters, and I was homeschooling and we were showing horses. And my plate was full. I just didn't think I could ever take on anything more. But in the riding arena with my 10-year-old, there was something went wrong where the horse all of a sudden was cantering in the class, and she's not supposed to canter in a walk trot class. So we thought, okay, something weird happened.
What does that mean? What does that even mean for the listeners?
So my daughter was a 10-year-old in a walk trot class. So the only 2 gaits that they're allowed to perform is walk and trot. They're not supposed to be running.
Okay.
So twice during that class, one time the loudspeaker blew up and all of a sudden the horse is running. And that was really scary for me because it was a huge horse. And my daughter had never been taught how to bring her down back to a walk or a trot. Sure. So I was looking at a runaway horse, but she really wasn't. And they were fine. So the class was over. They call them into lineup. And now the judges are making their decisions on who's going to win. And the trainers go in and stand in front of their walk trot riders. So there's supposed to be some safety there. Well, the trainer saw that the horse was starting to do something weird, like her neck was twitching. And the trainer reached her hand up to remove the forelock, the little hair between the ears. And all of a sudden, the horse reared in the air. Now, it happened so fast, but the number one cause of a rider's death is a horse falling over and landing and crushing the rider. So I had a 50-pound 10-year-old sitting on a 1,400-pound horse. And it happened so quickly that the trainer couldn't even reach the reins to pull them down. So you see Lily's the horse. She's up in the air. She's clawing with her front legs, trying to get her balance and get back on the ground. But my daughter was literally hanging from the reins. I mean, literally hanging 50 pounds from this horse's mouth and pulling her over backwards. So it was pretty inevitable. You could see what was going to happen, but nobody could move. I don't think anybody was breathing. And so the horse goes over. But as she was being pulled over, I'm standing at the rail in front of her, and I could see her squat on her left hind leg and push herself as hard as she could in the opposite direction of where she could feel my daughter was falling. And so as she was pushing herself, she was trying, imagine you're a 1,400-pound horse, you're being pulled over backwards, and you still have the consciousness to try to push yourself away. When she hit the ground, you couldn't see any space between my daughter and her. So I didn't know if she actually landed on her or not. So I'm jumping over the rail. Lily catches her breath and she gets up. My daughter wasn't moving. By the time I got to her, thank God, she was fine. The only thing she hurt was her pride. But back home, there was another incident where my daughters, both of us were riding, and I'm riding, and I hear some commotion going on the other side of the arena. And I look over and I see the trainer yanking my daughter off the same horse and just pounding on the horse's mouth. And I go, "What are you doing?" And she said, well, she started doing the same thing she did at the arena with that little neck contortion and thought she was going to rear. So she thought that the horse was spooking at something. This was a very seasoned, this horse was a United States national champion in the open division, which is trainers riding them. So the most intense competition. And she was a Canadian US national champion. And she could go in the arena with my trainer, win her class, and then 15 minutes later, take a walk, trot, rider safely around the arena. So, you go from being all pumped up and, putting everything you have into it to being calm and mellow. That's a priceless horse.
Yeah.
So the third time it happened, I happened to be standing right next to her, and I could see this like seizure spasm go up her neck. So we had equine veterinarians come out and look at her, and they said, Dr. Siegel, we're really not sure exactly what's wrong with her, but we'll tell you that number one, she's not safe to ride. She'll never be shown again. And here are your choices. You can put her out to a pasture and retire her, or you can put her down. And it is still, there's a core inside me that still gets triggered by that, because that was not an acceptable answer. And I, for the first time, really understood what people must feel like when they're told, I'm sorry, go home, pack your bags. There's nothing more we can do for you. I just knew something in my core woke up and said, there has to be something else. We just don't know what it is yet.
Right.
And that's what set me on my quest. And I also made a promise to my pet owners that I would never, ever utter those words, because I really do believe there's always something that we can do. Even, and when I say this, it's not minimizing it, even if it's quality of life, that's the most important thing we're aiming for. So whatever time you have on Earth School, it needs to be quality of life. Doesn't matter how long you're here, it has to be quality of life. So that's what my focus is helping to teach pet parents what can they do to help increase the quality and quantity of their pet's life. What does that look like? So the end of the story, because everybody asks, I always forget to tell, is Lily and my daughter went on 5 months later, after being told that she would never be ridden again and never be shown again, with all the alternative therapies that I had picked up in that short period of time. They went on to win the United States Youth Reserve National Championship, which is the most prestigious horse show in youth showing. And she's still alive in my backyard. She's just hangs out, comes up to the windows, and we just love on her.
I love that. My dog's name is Lily, so we great minds think alike. We named our animals. That's
Lily a crew.
Well, beautiful story. I want to just dive into exactly what you just said. Like, how can we extend the longevity of our pets? Because I think we're seeing a reduction in that. So tell us, how long should pets really be living? I do have a lot of listeners that have horses, but primarily dogs and cats, I think, are the most common pets that many of my patients have. So how old should pets be living to, and why are we seeing this reduction in longevity in them?
They should live into their 30s. And there is a cat in the World Guinness Book of Record that was 38 years and 3 days. There was another cat that was 34 years. And these were owned by a plumber in Texas. So we're not talking that they had any kind of crazy medicine being done that extended their longevity. They probably were indoor, outdoor. It didn't say in the article, but they probably had some form of species appropriate diet. And back then, there wasn't as many toxins in the environment as well. So you're right, they are not living as long as they should. In fact, there are statistics that show that dogs are living 7 years shorter than they did 20 years ago.
Wow, and that's significant.
That is totally due to toxicity.
Which I want to get into, but before we get into toxicity, let's go back to the species appropriate diet that you just mentioned. So in your opinion, what is a species appropriate diet for animals?
Well, whenever I'm asked that question, I refer back to nature, because I didn't make this up.
Yeah,
right? If you watch National Geographics, or back in my day, it was Marlene Perkins and the Wild Kingdom. But whatever show that you watch where they're studying animals in the wild, carnivores eat another animal. So they hunt it, they kill it, and they eat it right there in the spot. They don't drag it to a kibble processor. They don't put it in a can and put preservatives in it. And they eat a combination of meat, fat, bone, and organ meat. And then whatever was in the intestines of that animal as I know it's kind of gross sounding, but this is how nature is, right? So they kill an animal, they go into the abdomen, they're tearing out the entrails, they're getting some of that in their mouth. That's the probiotic and prebiotic food right there, because all of that's been pre-digested for them. So as a point, dogs and cats don't have amylase in their saliva, right? So if nature intended them to eat carbohydrates as a primary source, they would have put amylase in their mouth, but they didn't. So when I say I refer back to nature, I look at the biology of an individual species, and we're talking about carnivores right now with our
Yep.
dogs and cats.
Yep.
And I say, how did nature design them to thrive? And then I just try to model that as close as I can. So a raw diet is literally a diet that isn't cooked, because they need to eat the enzymes that are in living tissue. So the reason why we die and rot is because there are enzymes being released from our cells that are aiding in the breaking down of that tissue so that we can decompose and be recycled. Well, if you cook food, as your audience probably knows from you, then you destroy those digestive enzymes.
Yep.
Now, the only thing these animals are able to digest with is their pancreas. Well, over time, they're using up their pancreatic enzymes. They're making the pancreas angry. So we see a lot of pancreatitis, pancreatic cancer, and certainly a plethora of gastrointestinal diseases, particularly digestive disorders. So a raw diet, and a raw diet has to be grass-fed, grass-finished, just like for people, because otherwise you're getting all the hormones, chemicals, toxins, glyphosate, etc. So we want to make it as clean as we possibly can. And they need a good percentage of organ meat, because organ meat is where so many of our other nutrients lie. And then they need a proportion of fat, of course, in there. And that's their macronutrients. So when I created my diet, I was looking for, how can I create the healthiest diet out there? Most pet foods, to be called complete and balanced, have to add in the vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids. Well, we all know when you add a fatty acid to a diet, a fish oil based fatty acid, it's going to turn rancid when it's exposed to air.
Yep.
And then they can't keep the vitamins and minerals in the food without doing something to it. So they added synthetic vitamins and minerals. So here we have all these pet parents that are feeding what they think is the best, what they think is the most expensive, and it's supposed to be complete and balanced. And of course, it has it on the label. So wouldn't that be the truth? And every day somebody says to me, well, if it's so unhealthy, why are they allowed to sell it? Well, probably the same reason why they sell half the food in the grocery store to us, loaded with sugar, loaded with glyphosate, loaded with canola oil. You know, it's sad, but we have to be a more proactive community and become responsible for our health and the health of our pets and the health of planet Earth as well, right? Mother Earth is being polluted because of all the decisions that people are making that are getting dumped into Mother Earth. So it's a global problem, and we as individuals can do a major impact by simply choosing healthier lifestyles, looking at your labels, and don't buy things that are processed, that have a lot of chemicals, that are not organic. And we, the consumers, are going to be the ones that drive the industry to provide our needs. But we have to stop spending money on the things that are bad, because if nobody buys it, they won't make it anymore. So this is not even a hard battle. This is simply, it's a battle for your dollars. So choose where you want to spend them. So number one, species appropriate diet means a raw diet that is grass-fed, grass-finished, and has the proper balance of meat, fat, bone, and organ meats. Now, I separated out my micronutrients, the vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids, because I wanted to be able to A, dose them appropriately for body weight, and B, make sure that they were the highest grade, most bioavailable, i.e. the animal has to be able to absorb it and use it.
Sure.
And if it's synthetic, it may not be able to do that.
So when you say you separate it out, do you mean there's a supplement for that,
Yes.
separate from the food? Okay.
Yes. So our pet parents, they buy the macronutrients, meat, fat, bone, and organ meat. That's the Eva Love product, which, by the way, the name is love backwards and forwards. So it has a lot of sacred geometry in the name.
Oh yeah. Wow. I never noticed that.
Yeah. So they buy the meat, fat, bone, and organ meat, and then they buy the essential vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids. And that way at home, they're putting together the diet that they need for that animal. And then we have superfoods that we can add to that, and aminos that we can add. And there's other things that we test for to see what they're nutrient depleted in.
That just triggers so many questions. So, so how would you transition? Well, actually, before we even transition, let me go back to kibble. So essentially, you're saying all kibble is bad because it's processed, the nutritional value is destroyed. Is there a kibble? In a perfect world, we would all transition our animals to raw. And this may be the first time listeners are hearing that, so they may not do that overnight, or maybe they will. And you're providing a solution as far as how to do that. if they don't,
Right.
like from a kibble standpoint, is there any kibble that's better than others? Is there a benefit to finding like a hypoallergenic? I know my dog, I think, had chicken allergies, so I got her off chicken and on salmon. But then I think, is salmon really good for her to be consuming? Because would she have that in the wild? I don't know.
Exactly. She wouldn't have had it in the wild, and it's high in mercury. So, so we go back to that question: is why is kibble bad? So number one, it's been heated to very high temperatures to destroy the pathogens, because most kibbles are not human grade food. And then number two, they have to form that kibble to make it a nugget, right? It has to together.
Compressor,
so
whatever.
They combine it with, in the past, it used to be corn, but some kind of a grain in order to be able to get it to stick together. Well, we know that 90% or 95% of the corn used in commercial industry in the United States is genetically modified. So if you see that there's corn listed in your ingredients, don't buy that, or soy. Both of those are really bad. Beets, because the beets that they use are not the organic beets. It's the greens of the beets that are being thrown away from the beet industry, and they are the most concentrated toxins in there.
And what if it's corn and beet and soy free? Because my dog food is, right? It's sweet potato.
So great. So grain free is not carbohydrate free. And that's our next problem, is the carbohydrates. So we're talking about obligate carnivores, being our cats, have no dietary requirements for carbohydrates. So let me say that again. They have zero, no, nada, nunca carbohydrate requirements. They were not designed to eat carbohydrates. They got complex carbs in their diet, but as a primary source of eating them, they're not designed to use that. Dogs are carnivores, not obligates, because they've been eating off a man's garbage a lot longer. They have some adaptability to some carbohydrates, but we're talking low.
Okay.
All kibble will have 40 to 60% carbohydrates. And then grain-free, since you brought it up, grain-free is actually the worst, because not only does it still have the carbohydrates, they use potato starch, pea starch, and all that, but we're seeing a tremendous uprising of dogs and cats with heart disease, and they think it has something to do with the taurine deficiency. Cats are obligate, they have to eat taurine in their diet, and they get that from their meat source. And that's why cats not getting a meat source are prone to getting cardiomyopathy. So what the pet manufacturers did many years ago, when we had this onslaught of cats dying of cardiomyopathy, they added taurine to the diet. So they didn't tell pet parents, oh, your cat's dying of cardiomyopathy because there's no meat in the diet. They
take taurine.
Yeah, they just added the taurine. But there's a ton of other things that meat provides that is more than just taurine.
Right.
So again, we're going back to species appropriate. So the problems with all processed foods, whether it's a kibble or whether it's in a can, is it's going to be no enzymes. It's going to be devoid of enzymes. It's going to have high carbohydrates. If it's not organic, it's going to be full of hormones, chemicals, pesticides, etc. And then the extra problem for kibble is that it's dehydrated. So animals were designed by nature to get 70% of their water intake from their diet, eating it in the meat. So we're made of 70% water, right? Animals are made of 70% water. So when they killed something and they ate the meat in the state that they killed it in, that was 70% of their moisture that they got.
Interesting.
Cats came from the desert. So they literally had to get most of their water from their diet. And they haven't adapted well. That's why we see number one cause of death in cats is kidney disease. Cancer is number two. But kidney disease is number one. And it's because they're so dehydrated all the time, especially if they're eating a kibble diet, that everything going through the kidneys is concentrated and filtered. So a little bit of toxin. Well, imagine if I had a cup of water and I had a swimming pool, right? 2 different volumes of water. And I put the same amount of toxin in the cup as I do the swimming pool. Well, obviously, the cup is going to be more toxic because it's more concentrated. Where the swimming pool, it's so dilute, you may not get very much in there. So that's what the cat represents. It represents the cup of water in their kidneys, and it's very concentrated. So anything that's toxic that's going through those kidneys is going to have the potential for creating a lot more harm.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so for the listeners, how do they transition? So even when I changed my dog from a kibble that had chicken in it to this salmon product, right? The vet says to slowly transition over. Is that necessary? Like, and so let's say I want to purchase some of your dog food and transition my dog over to eating raw. Does she, I'm thinking, has her body adapted back to that adaptability you mentioned to eating this kibble? And will she then have to adapt to eating raw meat? And like, how would she be transitioned over?
Fabulous question. And so, yes, we do transition any new diet, whatever you're going to, slowly over a period of 4 to 6 days. So if your pet has a grumbly tummy once in a while, if they go off their food occasionally, if they vomit periodically, if they have intermittent diarrhea, those are all indicators that the GI tract probably has a lot of inflammation, leaky gut, and so there's a lot of damage there. So in addition to making the transition slowly, we recommend using products that help to heal the leaky gut. Of course, step number one, you have to stop polluting the body. So all the areas that you can stop the pollution in the food, the water, the environment, try to do that first. And then number two is making sure that we're using products that actually repair the tight junctions. And when you go to my website, the evoloveraw.com, there's products on there that you can recommend. And then
but can I pause you there? I want to stay here for a moment. This is so interesting to me because literally how we apply functional medicine concepts to humans, like we should also be applying these to pets, but there aren't a lot of vets that are doing that. No. So in chapter 1 of my book, I discuss leaky gut syndrome. And so there are a lot of nutrients that we're using, including amino acids to help heal the gut and probiotics and enzymes and whatnot. So can you expand a little bit? Let's go to supplements for a minute. So do you have probiotics for dogs? I will say my vet once gave me a probiotic and I read all the labels. It was one strain. And then there was a paragraph of other crap, excuse my language, in there. And I thought, oh, this is not even worth me spending the money on. Like, no.
Absolutely. So I've been very honored to work with Dr. Zach Bush, and he developed a pet line for a product that was similar to his Restore. And I represented that product and did lectures. And I actually did the original testing of that product in my practice. And so I put that thing in every orifice. It was great. It's on my website. So all of the above that you mentioned, we use digestive enzymes because we know these animals are depleted. And if it's a young puppy, there's not going to be such a big problem. But that list of symptoms that I just talked about in your older animals already tells us that the pancreas is depleted. They're probably insulin resistant. They've got leaky gut. They're having a hard time digesting to begin with. A lot of these animals are overweight, or they have skin problems or ear infections or other health challenges. All of those are symptoms that are letting us know that the gut is not working well. So we use digestive enzymes as a support, not only with the meal, but in between meals, because we want to clean up that extraneous protein and junk that's in the body that the body may not know how to get rid of. And so enzymes are important. And yes, we use probiotics, but we use fermented foods. Again, I just go back to nature. Our microbiome is made up of trillions of organisms. And it's not just the trillions, it's the diversity of those trillions that are so important. So we need to be able to allow everybody to flourish. We're in a time where we're blaming and shaming viruses and bacteria and parasites, and we're pointing fingers at them and saying, they're the bad guys. They're not the bad guys. The reason they have become out of balance is because the host that we are to all these organisms, we're their planet, we have become very inhospitable. And so things are out of balance. So they're just trying to survive, and they're letting us know that the ecosystem, the terrain, is not a good terrain for everybody to thrive in. So what I try to do is restore the terrain. And there are actually white papers out now that indicate that taking a commercial probiotic long-term will inhibit the diversity of the microbiome, because you're making them the bully, right? You're just flooding the body with these guys all the time, and they become the predominant species, and the other guys don't have a chance to step in and do their job. So one other fact, and I know you know this, but this is really interesting to me, that we have a certain number of genes that run our body. Genes are what actually tell our bodies what to turn on, what to turn off, how we're going to function. And an earthworm has twice the number of genes that we do, an earthworm. So, that fact says that they are genetically more advanced than we are. What we have done as a species is we and our pets have taken these organisms, the viruses, the bacteria, the fungi, all of these parasites, and we're using their genomic information to communicate to our mitochondria how to run our body. Now think about that for a moment. If we get rid of all of these organisms, then we get rid of most of our genetic communication. So it's super important that we not only foster a very healthy environment for these organisms to thrive in.
That terrain,
But they have to have the diversity in this terrain to be able to function well. So that's super, super important. So it's not the parasites that are bad. We're not trying to go out there and kill everybody. We're trying to create an ecosystem where the good guys feel like they can thrive because they have a good environment to thrive in. So we want to develop that terrain, which your audience knows what that means.
Yep. So I have to ask, I don't know how long you've been feeding animals kind of raw food, even, your brand, but do you see the health dramatically improve in those animals? And do you see the increase in longevity, right? Number of years in the life? Now, are you already seeing that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll see changes within 2 and 3 days. We'll see improvements. Now, it depends on the individual and what their challenges are. Some things we have to do a little bit more. As an example, vitamin D is very important for all of us. And we as humans, we get vitamin D from our diet and from the sun. Herbivores, which are the cows and the deer and all those guys that we're feeding to our animals, they only get vitamin D from the sun. They eat their grasses and they convert their vitamin D. Carnivores only get vitamin D from their protein source. So if they're eating a protein source that is deficient in vitamin D,
which kibble probably is, or
it is, and there was a university study that showed that 85% of animals, eating a kibble diet were vitamin D deficient.
Wow.
So we all know that vitamin D is not only important, but it's the main driver for our innate immune system. So if you're vitamin D deficient or your pet's vitamin D deficient, then their innate immune system can't function. I don't care how many antibiotics you throw at them. I don't care how many drugs you use. It can't work. So these are things that are in the traditional world, it's sad to say, that veterinarians aren't even talking about. They're not even looking for it.
Can you just supplement with vitamin D? Or I understand, I think you're saying the better solution is to transition them to this raw diet, which would then have vitamin D?
Yes, there's going to be higher sources of vitamin D in the diet, but if this animal is already vitamin D deficient, we want to test for that along with B12, along with magnesium, because vitamin D and magnesium play cofactors together in a lot of metabolic pathways.
So you literally test animals' vitamin D levels and B12? I mean, it makes sense, but if I go to my vet and ask for that, I think they're going to look at me cross-eyed like,
yeah,
but it makes sense. It totally makes sense.
Know you can do that. It's really crazy because we're not taught that in vet school. It was only because of me having to dive into the world of the body's biology. And that's what I do. I don't treat symptoms. Do we manage a symptom? Yes, we'll manage a symptom because you want the animal to be comfortable. But I don't treat symptoms. I only manage them. I treat the root cause of the body dysfunction, it lies in the body's biology. Where in the metabolic pathways is there a dysfunction? And how can we fix that? Even cancer. We have great success with cancer because
I want to get into that.
Biology.
I want to get into so many things. This is going to be a long episode.
I know. We're going to have to go for a few hours. So, let's make sure we unpack the whole raw diet, because I didn't finish answering your question. How do you transition?
Yeah.
And so we do transition slowly. In most cases, we're going to do gut repair at the same time. And we may put them on enzymes if it's indicated. For sure, going to put them on some fermented foods. We make kefir in our office, which is a fermented raw cow's milk. You can do fermented raw goat's milk. You can do sauerkraut, of course, all organic. And they don't have to eat all the vegetables. It's the juice. They just need to get the organisms. So having some kind of a fermented food as a
Right,
probiotic
right, right.
in their diet on a daily basis is super important. The second thing, besides, of course, the right vitamins, minerals, I do want to mention fatty acids, because fatty acids
Yes.
are essential. And we know that a majority of people are using fish oils and the like, and most of those are rancid. So most of those are actually causing more harm than they are causing good. In fact, I actually almost had heart surgery because I was taking a very high grade rancid fatty acid, not knowing it was rancid, and it was causing a cardiac arrhythmia, really severe. Went into the doctor. They said, "Oh, you have right ventricular outflow tract disease." This was years ago.
Hmm.
And right before I went in for surgery, I was feeling so horrible. I just stopped everything. I stopped the atenolol and the Western drugs. I stopped all of my supplements. And within 3 days, all of my arrhythmias went away. I went into the hospital and they go, "You're not having
Wow.
any PVCs. We can't do your surgery." And then it was years later that I found out about this product that I was taking, and that it was a rancid fatty acid, and it was causing people to have heart attacks. Who knew?
Wow.
So of course I don't take that anymore, but we have moved, because of a lot of my research into fatty acids and wanting to understand it, we've moved into parent essential oils. And those are the omega-3 and omega-6 that make up the cell membrane. And then our bodies have the ability to metabolize all the other essential oils that we need for our metabolism. Your DHA and EPA, all of that is metabolized from your parent essential oils. So there's a lot of new research coming out that are helping to validate the importance of this. And it's all about the cell membrane. We want to make sure our cell membrane is the healthiest that it can be. So we need the right proteins, we need the right omega fatty acids to make a nice cell wall that is able to transmit electrical potential and all the things that it has to do to keep a healthy cell. And that product's on my website as well.
Awesome. So tell me, what is the base of the raw food then? Like, what's the protein source?
We use chicken and we use beef.
Both?
Variety
Yeah.
is great. Yeah. So we have an all beef, we have an all chicken, and we have a combination. So people a lot of times say, "Oh, my animal's allergic to chicken," like you said earlier.
Yeah.
And truly, it's the leaky gut. So it's not so much that we're allergic to a food as we have a lot of inflammation and we have leaky gut. And so when we fix the leaky gut and we reduce the inflammation, we find that the allergies go away.
What a perfect transition. That was literally the next thing I wanted to talk about was dog allergies. Like, why have pet allergies increased just like they have in humans? And then kind of what are symptoms of dog allergies and like licking the paws, itchy ears, whatnot? But are the allergies essentially a result of leaky gut, which you just said? So can you break down kind of symptoms of allergies in animals?
Absolutely. Well, we have this catch-all thing called allergies, and that's what we put into the pot, anything that we can't describe that involves the skin and the respiratory tract. But I don't know that there are true allergies. Certainly we have our IgG, IgM, we have our antibodies that respond to the toxins that are coming in. But if we go back, ignoring the symptom, and we go back to the root cause, and again, we fix the biology, we'll find that most of those allergies go away. There's a story on my website in the YouTube channel, a dog named Holly, who had come in because she was only 4 or 5 years old, big Great Dane, and she'd been to multiple veterinarians, had been on many different antibiotics, all kinds of injections and products to stop the itching. And this poor dog was covered in craters. And when I'm talking craters, she looked like the moon. And she was incessantly itchy. Of course, she was eating processed diet. She was drinking tap water. And so we did biopsies because I was not going to be failure number 4. So I wanted to make sure I had a definitive diagnosis and there wasn't some kind of red herring in there. And it came back allergic skin disease, which is really not defining anything. It's just saying this dog has very allergic responsive problem. So we immediately changed her diet into a raw diet, 100% raw. We changed her water into a more structured, clean, filtered water. And then I did have to put her on antibiotics for 10 days because we cultured 2 organisms I'd never even heard of before. That's how resistant this dog was to everything. And so she had a 10-day course of antibiotics, but her skin was already clearing up by day 3. Her itching had markedly reduced, and 2 weeks later, I have pictures of her. She has a gorgeous coat. All the skin is healed. All the sores went away. Her hair has grown back in, and she has a beautiful, lush, shiny coat. So all of that to say that we don't want to just blame the allergy and then come up with a pill for the ill, a diet for the disease. You have to treat the underlying cause. Now, if they're super itchy, yes, we'll take care of the itching. But typical things that we see for allergies are skin infections. They get seborrhea, the itchy flaking, the sores. Fleas contribute to a lot of that. So we want to make sure that you don't have a flea infestation on your pet, because that can set them off and tremendous itching from that. But they can also get ear infections. And many times the original onset will be an ear infection. And why that is because the ear is skin wrapped into a tube and stuck down a deep, dark hole. So oftentimes it's ear infections are the first manifestation of leaky gut that is telling us that we have a problem. And then if not taken care of, it'll fulminate into bigger and worse things.
And how do you know if a dog has an ear infection? I mean, obviously the animal can't tell you that their ear hurts, but will they try to itch their ear, or what will they?
Yes.
Okay.
They're itching at their ear. They're shaking their head. There's discharge. There's smell. So everybody should lift up their dog's ear and look inside and smell it. It should be clean. Hair is, in some species, they're going to have hair down there, but there really shouldn't be any other discharge, and the animal should be comfortable. So that would be one of your first indications in ear infection, that there is a bigger underlying problem. Now, we have inhalant allergies, like when we have the hay fever thing and the pollen's high and all those things, and we're sneezing and red and runny eyes. That's how we exhibit inhalant allergies. Dogs exhibit the same thing through itching of their skin. They'll itch their armpits, they'll chew their feet, and those are indications of the disease called atopy. But again, it all comes back to leaky gut. So I don't want everybody to get hung up on, oh, my dog has those symptoms. I want you to understand that all disease, from allergies to cancer, it's all based in inflammation.
Right.
So if we can fix the inflammation and we can allow the body's innate intelligence to turn back on again, we can fix virtually anything. There's a few nuances in there. We have emotional component that's involved. You know, there's some deeper messages in there. But for today's conversation, let's just hit the surface.
We've got to reduce that inflammatory burden of the body, primarily by changing the food to a species appropriate diet. But what are some other contributing variables to the inflammation? So you mentioned glyphosate earlier, which would be found in the foods. What about mold? I mean, to be honest, I told you this before we started recording today. I've treated a lot of human patients for mold toxicity. And I think of, well, what about the animals that are also in that environment? Right? The humans get treated, and hopefully the animals get removed from the source of the exposure, right? The family moves or whatnot. And finally, the air is filtered and the home is remediated. But how do we identify if dogs have, we're kind of going down another path here, but have mold toxicity? Yeah. Is that another variable? And then even what about vaccinations? Can that be another layer of toxicity? So packed question here.
Yeah, you packed a lot in there. So let's unpack that by going through how do we eliminate exposure to toxins. And I break it down into 6 categories. Food was number 1. We covered that very well, of course, grass-fed, grass-finished, organic, et cetera.
Yes.
And then, and that's with even your supplements and your treats. So a lot of people spend a lot of money on their food, and then they go and buy toxic treats and they don't read the label. There's a lot of nasty stuff in there. All right. So number 2 is water.
You sell
water
dog treats too?
Important. What's that?
Do you sell dog treats too?
Well, we make freeze-dried dog treats. So so we try to keep it to healthy foods.
Okay. Back to water. Okay.
Yeah, we're back to water. So water is the next most important thing. And I think we're starting to really understand water in a way that our world has never understood it before, and never had to, because the water that we traditionally drank was already structured. We didn't have to think about it. But now that we have these civilized cities, and we have water that's coming through treatment plants, and they're being piped into our houses and all these lead pipes, and we have all these contaminants that are coming through, you know, just since World War II, there's been over 85,000 synthetic toxins, your body doesn't know what to do with that have been developed and released just since World War II, 1942. And where does that go? Eventually it's going to go in our water system. So when we talk about drinking tap water, there's next to toxic food, that's probably the second most toxic thing you can put in your body. And then people go, well, I drink bottled water. Well, is it plastic? Because you got all your BPA and all of your problems with plastics. And what's the water inside that bottle? Is it any cleaner? Is it structured or not? So let me just unpack structured for a minute because it's super important. So structured water has to do with the molecular configuration of that water. And our bodies are designed to take in structured water. The water that is in our extracellular matrix, all that space between everything, and even in our cells, is already structured. Our mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cell, where we get all of our energy from, produces structured water. So structured water is really important. What's happening, though, is we're drinking unstructured water. We're drinking dead, contaminated water, and that's causing damage. We're not supporting our body. So I am a huge proponent of understanding this and using the best source of water. Now, for most people, it's going to be getting a machine that is able to make highly filtered, taking out glyphosate, heavy metals, all of that, and structuring the water. And in my perfect world, I love adding molecular hydrogen to that water that I'm drinking. Because
even for animals, do you give it to animals?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the same way we make hydrogen in our body, it's supposed to be made in our gut by our healthy microbes when we have a healthy gut lining. Well, we've just spent all this time talking about how unhealthy the gut lining is of these animals that are eating processed foods, that are vitamin deficient, that have loads of toxins. We just did a heavy metal study with Quicksilver Scientific, and we found on average that animals had 5 or more heavy metals in their system that were contributing to toxicity.
Wow.
5 or more.
I believe it. I believe it. But back to testing in animals, I'm glad you're testing. I have to go off
heavy
on
metals as well.
Yeah.
So we have food and we have water as the two biggest things. Then we get into air quality, and we do have our owners test. They have companies come in or they do a home test kit, whatever. But I live in Florida, so we have leaks all the time. We have high humidity. So mold is an extra big problem in Florida. And again, we have to address it. You have to be testing for it and then mediating it and mitigating it and doing things for the pet that help to support the immune system. But keep in mind that we have organs of detoxification, all of us. The pets have 6, we have 6. It's the kidney, the colon, the lungs, the liver, the skin, and the lymphatics. One of the reasons why we're seeing so much toxicity is that we've overwhelmed our organs of elimination. We haven't cleaned them and taken care of them properly, so they're not functioning. And now that extra burden that we're being exposed to is contributing to the breakdown of the terrain and, of course, the symptoms that we're seeing. So in unpacking your question, how do we take care of the detoxification process? We detoxify all 6 organs of elimination. So everybody has their different ways of doing it. For our lungs, we do salt therapy. So I literally have a salt booth in my office.
For animals.
For animals, yeah.
Wow.
So the animals go into the salt booth. It helps to detoxify their skin as well, because that salt is, of course, antibacterial and antiviral and antifungal, and it coats the coat. But you're also breathing it. So it's going, we hold their mouth shut so that they're breathing through their nose. Get them pants so that they're breathing through their mouth, and it's cleaning the sinuses, it's cleaning the upper airways. And if we can get them to take a deep breath, it's actually getting down into their lungs. So super important. It's like taking a scrub brush and cleaning the ciliary membranes and making sure that they can function, because we have so much crud that's on them. I'll tell another quick little story.
Yeah.
On me. Years ago, I was going to go dancing, and I'm an avid dancer, and I was out of breath on my second dance. And I thought, wow, that's really weird. I went home the next day. I went into the salt booth. I almost had an asthma attack because I cranked that baby up, and there was so much gunk and debris in my lungs that it just reacted. So I had to take an inhaler, and I was fine after that. But I went into the salt booth every day for 3 days in a row, and my entire ability to have my stamina, be able to breathe again, was back to normal. But I didn't appreciate that it was gone until I did some high intensity exercise. So for our animals, the same thing is happening. You know, we're not we're not paying attention to the lungs as one of their organs of elimination. And then, of course, we have hyperbaric oxygen that we use, infrared saunas. We do lymphatic therapy, because I think of the two organs in the body that, in my opinion, are the most important, it's the liver and the lymphatics, because they do the most work. Yeah. So we're always doing things for the liver, always making the liver happy. We're doing sauna. We do full spectrum infrared saunas. We do special products that help to flush the liver. We do coffee enemas. We do, of course, ozone, hyperbaric oxygen, all of that to help.
Incredible. And you're in Florida and I'm in Iowa, so you're not close. So I can't take my dog to see you. But we have, at our clinic, we have a far infrared sauna, right? We have a couple. So you're basically saying I should take my dog in the sauna with me. Now, the general rule of thumb for kids, at least, I usually say a minute per year of life. So if the kid's 2, they really only should be in there a few minutes. So like, how do you, a generally speaking healthy dog, how long would you dose them? Like, can they go in at full intensity or?
Great question. So we go in at lower temperatures as well. So we start out at like 105 degrees, because animals don't sweat like we do. So we start at 105. Remember, their body temperature is 102. So their normal body temperature is between 100 and 102. So 105 isn't that hot. You get them used to going in there. It could be 10 minutes. It could be 20 minutes. Your goal is 30 minutes.
Okay.
But they're still getting infrared, right? Along with the heat.
Yes.
And if it's, again, going to the animal's tolerance, you increase the temperature a little bit, keeping water in there. I would always keep a pet parent in there, so you're watching them and they don't get heated. And then we monitor the temperature. So the whole goal, in order to stimulate heat shock proteins, oh my gosh, we could have a whole course on that, but it's raising your body temperature by 2 degrees. So
and that's what we're trying to achieve with the dogs or the animals also. If they'll sit in the sauna with
So you need to check the temperature before you go in. And then your goal is, can you increase that temperature for 10 minutes by 2 degrees? Now, the other way that we do infrared, in addition to going into the sauna, is we have infrared pads, and they are full spectrum pads, and they produce heat, and they have jade stones. So there's a lot of negative ions that are coming off. So there's a lot of extra pluses that we get from the pads, and the animals love it. If you really want to get their temperature up, you put one pad on the bottom and a pad on top. Now you make a sandwich out of them, right? And you got the heat going from both directions. But when they're laying on the infrared pad, they're getting that infrared. It's coming through. And as it absorbs into one area, it will start to disseminate into the rest of the body as well.
Just fascinating. It just makes 100% sense, if that makes it just makes sense, because this is how I approach humans. But I'm just kind of blown away right now, thinking, can I take my dog to our local salt room? Would they allow animals?
Well, many of them don't. And one of the things, I am just the one that raises my hand when the universe says, hey, we need something. I keep raising my hand saying, I'll do it. So we're creating spas, family wellness centers, which are going to be a franchise, and they will be all over the world, not just the United States. And in these franchises, they're designed to help people and their pets be able to detoxify on a regular basis. It's really something that our society has lost.
Totally neglected.
We don't clean our organs of elimination, and we've eliminated most of our hormetic stressors. And I'll define that for you real quick for your audience. Is a hormetic stressor is a stress that our bodies were innately designed to understand, that helps us to make adaptations so that we could be stronger and better for future. So one of the hormetic stressors was fasting. And we talked about food earlier and what to feed, but let's talk about how to feed it. I don't think I ever answered the question on how to transition slowly. It could be 20% added into their old diet, and then a day or two later add another 20%, and they get to 50%, and then 70, 90, and then you eliminate. So each time you're adding in the new food, you're eliminating some of the old food. Right. And then you're doing it to the animal's tolerance. If it's a young, healthy animal, they're going to convert really quick and easy. If it's an older animal, they may need the probiotics, the enzymes, the gut repair. They may need other things to help them.
Sure.
But I always go low and slow on everything, even my supplements. I tell people, start at a lower dosage and work your way up. Let the body get used to it, and then get to your target dose. So we were talking about hormetic stressors. we have in the kibble world gotten used to filling the bowl for our animals and just letting it stay there all the time. Well, that's not good, because in the wild, they were designed to have a minimum of a 12-hour fast, simply because they only hunted at dawn and dusk.
Right.
So everything in between, they weren't eating. And only when they got hungry enough to want to go out and expend that energy it took to hunt something down and kill it and wrestle with it, did they eat again. But they weren't always successful either. So what would happen when they were out there, they missed their dinner. They didn't catch anything. That's a 24-hour fast, assuming they even get dinner the next morning, okay, or breakfast the next morning. So this intermittent fasting is as important as it is for us, is that important for our pets. So number one, don't fill the bowl. If you're a raw food feeder, you won't anyway, because you're not going to leave meat out all day long.
Right.
So you feed at dawn and dusk, or 12 hours apart, and that's your ideal. And then don't cave in. Don't feed them in between, because that fasting is really important. And I do encourage my owners under supervision to even consider a 24-hour fast once in a while for their pets. Maybe just once a week, where you just skip dinner or you skip breakfast and you make it a different day of the week. And that way they go into what is called autophagy. So our bodies were designed to use hormetic stressors to get rid of a lot of our toxins and make them the adaptations. Well, when we are fasting, our body still is working. Our pet's body's still working. You're still breathing. Our organs are working. So they have to find a source of food, if you will, somewhere different. And so what they do is they take the old dead and dying cells and they break them down. They repurpose the parts that they can use. And that's how they keep going. So you need to have that period of time where you're not just building. You got to clean up the debris. We're making trillions of cells a day. I think the number was in humans, something like 300 billion cells a day that we make every day, new cells. Well, what's happening to the old cells, right? We got to get rid of them. And that's what the fasting and autophagy was designed to do, is get rid of the debris so you make room for healthier, better cells. And then temperature extremes is another hormetic stressor, where we used to be exposed to the winter. Our animals didn't live inside. They lived outside when it was they were in the snow, or they found a cave, but they got really, really cold. And then in the summertime, they got really, really hot. We don't have those extremes because we set our thermostat between 68 and 75 year round, right? So our animals are now inside with us, and they're not getting exposed to those hormetic stressors, which is another problem in the body's metabolism. And then the third one is high intensity exercise, which I'm not recommending people with old sedentary animals that are obese go out there and high intensity exercise, but it's something that as we get younger animals and we are applying all these principles, the right diet, the right supplements, the right water, the right clean environment, and we add exercise into that so that they are used to having that high intensity exercise. It's literally 20 seconds and then a break, and then another 20 seconds. It could be swimming in the pool, but what is tolerant for that animal? Work with your veterinarian, hopefully a good holistic veterinarian, so that you can learn what is safe for your animal to do.
Sure. So good. So good. Okay. I want to go back just for a moment. Don't want to spend too much time on this, but I posted, of course, on Facebook before I was going to interview you, and there were a lot of questions amongst listeners. And one of them was, do dogs need all these shots? I mean, do they really? Obviously, to put my dog in doggy daycare, she has to get her kennel cough, and there are a couple that are, supposedly required. But I do wonder, do dogs need all these shots, especially for like Lyme and what's the other one? Comes from raccoon pee. Lyme and what's it called?
Leptospirosis?
Yes, that Lyme and lepto. Yes, that combo, right? I wonder, because vaccinations have gone up with humans, right? The amount that we're vaccinating humans has dramatically been on the rise. Is the same true in animals? And do animals really need all these shots?
That's a great question. I'm going to diplomatically answer that. So I believe that we need to look at our risk factors. Let's talk about leptospirosis, for instance. If you have an animal that has a high exposure to leptospirosis, that can be a fatal disease, and it does exist, and we do diagnose it. So you have to look at your lifestyle, What are you feeding? How healthy is that animal? What is the risk of exposure? What is their immune system like? And then make a decision as to whether or not the risk cost benefit is worth it. And that's specifically for leptospirosis. For distemper parvo, there are so many university studies out there now that verify that once these animals have been vaccinated, at least 2 vaccines over the age of 14 weeks, that most of them have immunity for 7 to 9 years for distemper parvo. And on the feline side, I don't think the studies are out for them, but we know that they have immunity for a lot longer than 1 year. It was so important to be evaluated that a lot of the companies came out with a 3-year distemper shot for dogs because they knew that that vaccine was going to last longer than that. With dogs, we can do titers.
Yep.
So for pet owners that keep their animal safe and protected, you can consider vaccinating if you have them as a young animal over 14 weeks of age, maybe 14 and 17 weeks, and then do a titer. Make sure that they're showing an immune response to that particular problem, that antigen. And then from there, you can titer every 3 years. We use a 3-year vaccine. So we titer every 3 years. And until those antibodies drop, we don't revaccinate. Now that's not 100% of the answer because antibodies don't tell the whole story about immunity, but it's something that we can do for now that gives us some type of a decision-making tree. Rabies is required by law. So you will never hear me tell somebody don't do a rabies shot because it is required by law. I'm not willing to lose my license. And rabies is a big issue if a human is exposed because then they have to go through shots and all that. So I would say when it comes to rabies, get a mercury-free rabies vaccine. So there are out there. You want to ask your veterinarian what kind of vaccine do they have and is it free of thimerosal? Yeah. And then do it according to the instructions of your state and your city. For us, we can do a 3-year vaccine after the first year. And then for people who don't want to vaccinate, I would just say, use your own guidance. If you don't want to vaccinate, then that's your choice. Just like I personally am not going to vaccinate myself. I haven't vaccinated myself for anything since I was a kid, and I don't intend to now. So I just will make sure that my immune system is as strong as I can make it. And I'm going to take care of my body in the best way possible. And the principles that we talked about before, the good food, the good water, eliminating toxins from the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then with all of that, I'm going to use good judgment as to where I'm going to expose myself to problems, and is it worth it or not?
Yeah. Good answer. I want to stay on the concept of toxicity just for a minute because I want to make sure we get into EMFs. But before we get to EMFs, are dog toys, kind of like how when I had an infant chewing on teethers, whatnot, just like how those can contain toxins, can a lot of dog toys, like chew toys, also contain endocrine disrupting chemicals that cause cancer? I mean, are there healthy dog chew toys we should be also looking for? Am I kind of thinking right there?
You are. I don't know if that's the biggest problem that we deal with because I think food, water, and environment are the biggest, and then EMF, which we'll get to. I think those are the biggest, but certainly we are seeing that there are toxins in some of the toys. So what is the material made up of? What I see more than even the toxins are foreign body ingestion, where the toy can get ripped up or parts of it can be swallowed, and then the animal can have a foreign body, which sometimes has to be surgically removed.
Sure. Let's go to EMFs.
So yeah, to make sure I answer that question, though, I just want to make sure I answered it, is like anything else, read your labels, know what the material is made up of, and if it's impregnated with formaldehyde or things that are going to be toxic, don't use it. We also use EWG.org, the Environmental Working Group Association, because they have a lot of products that they list on their site, and it's free, and you can look it up and see what is the rating for those products.
Right, totally. Yes, we heavily talk about that on the show. I do
Okay.
want to talk about EMFs because we've also talked about the dangers of EMFs with humans, and I do believe they can damage DNA. They can cause a lot of excitotoxicity or excitation, I should say, causing anxiety and insomnia and palpitations and whatnot. So I've heard you say before that it's important to shut off your Wi-Fi even during the day, because why should your animal's not using a smartphone during the day? So why should they be subject to Wi-Fi all day long? Is there
Absolutely.
tell me your opinion on EMFs, and is there a correlation or association between EMF exposure and then neurological disorders like seizures in animals? Do you believe that?
Absolutely. I think we're seeing the same ramifications that we're seeing in people, in animals. And I recently came across an article that was talking about how EMFs are now being shown to be DNA disruptors. So they're actually creating folding of proteins and actually damaging our DNA. So I think we all knew that all along, but now it's becoming even much bigger of a topic as 5G gets rolled out on us. What we need to try to do is mitigate as much as we possibly can how much exposure we have. Well, the only way to know what your exposure is to test for it. So I'm a big advocate for testing. And they make meters now they're not expensive, maybe a couple $100. And you can go around and test your dirty electricity, the amount of EMF, your overhead. There's so much that you want to be looking for. So you contact me, or I'm sure you guys have a lot as well, but if anybody wants to private message me, I'll give them some resources for people that are really, really good in the EMF world, and can make recommendations for some of the newer meters that are out there. So number one, you have to test. Number two, for the ability to mitigate damage from EMF is distance. So either turning it off or getting farther away from it. Those are your two biggest things that you can do. And of course, number three, yeah, go ahead.
A little delay in the internet there. I've heard of individuals having their router sitting on top of the dog cage, and that just makes me sick to my stomach, because then your dog is getting blasted with radiation essentially. Right. So yes, to distance, I applaud that.
Yeah. So you want to know where your routers are. And if you have a smart meter, try to get rid of it. I have these great stories. So my property, I have a food forest literally on a little third of an acre, and my property is fenced in. So the meter people wanted to come in and read the meter, and they haven't been able to. So I just read it for them and I send it. Well, my gate was open. I had some workers here. So it just happened to be the meter guy came by, and he was going to install a smart meter without asking me. And I get a notice that he couldn't get to the meter because there were too many plants in front of it. It was right where all my ginger grows and my turmeric.
Well, that worked out in your favor.
Thank God he couldn't get to it. And they threatened that they were going to force me into a 5G meter. And I said, well, I'll just have my attorney pick up from there, because we have health challenges and I'm not willing to have a 5G meter. And I haven't heard a peep from them since. That's been almost 8 months.
Yeah, good.
So we have to push back a little bit, but if you can avoid a smart meter at all means, do that. Number one, test. Number two, get distance. Number three is turning it off as much as you can, and hardwiring. When I built my house, we went through all this expense to go Wi-Fi, but back then it was 20 years ago. Who knew? And now I called the same company back out, and they said, can you hardwire all my rooms, please? And so I just went back and just hardwired everything.
And if you live under power lines or right near a cell tower, you can try to mitigate. I mean, there are, EMF blocking paints that exist and whatnot. You can try to mitigate, but you might want to move. That's just something else to consider. On the line of toxicity, I want to ask about lipomas, because I feel like animals get these growths. And do you feel like that is the root cause of that is toxicity?
Inflammation and toxicity, yeah. In Chinese medicine, they call lipomas qi stagnation. So things aren't moving. We can actually improve them through lymphatic therapy. So I think it has a lot to do with the fact that our qi is stagnant and the lymph is stagnant, and we're not doing the things that help our lymph to keep moving, right? When we use a rebounder now, but that's not exactly in nature. You don't go out and find rebounders in nature, but we did run and play and exercise. So that's part of my routine. And for the animals, we try to get them on little trampolines lightly, get them to jump up and down a little bit with their owners, or massages. I do a particular procedure called assisted lymphatic therapy. And we use a machine that has glass probes, and it produces a microcurrent, negative ions, and it uses inert noble gases. So you're going over the body, opening up the ports where the drainage occurs, and then we decongest the body and sweep into the areas where that lymph has to flow into. And we find that's very effective.
Again, makes sense that even getting your animal into a sauna could help there as well, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Everything that we do, the whole premise for spas was, did we talk about spas already?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So, they're detox centers for people and their pets, but step number one in detoxification is you have to become in a parasympathetic state. And let me define that for the pet parents here. So we have an autonomic nervous system that has two branches. Imagine I have a teeter-totter here. We have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic, and they're designed to be in balance until you need one or the other. So when danger is imminent, you need your parasympathetic side to get fully turned on so that you can run and fight and get away from the bear, or beat the bear up so that you can live. But we were designed, once the danger is gone, for that parasympathetic side, the sympathetic side to go down. And then your parasympathetic side is your rest, repair, digest, detoxify, and reproduction. So if you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, you really aren't thinking about what you want to eat for dinner, who you're going to have sex with, and if you have to pee or poo. It's not important, because your only concern is running away from the bear. But when the bear is gone, then your parasympathetic side kicks in and does all the rest. That's how we rest, repair, when we digest. So it's super important that in today's society, we acknowledge that a majority of people are stuck in sympathetic tone, and their animals are stuck in sympathetic tone because they're in training to their pet parent. So you may think, my dog is fine. It's laying there and sleeping all day long when I'm not home. But you don't realize that all of the energy that you're putting out, that animal is in training to that. That's a physics principle. It's not even woo-woo. So when they're in training to that, you are releasing neurochemicals that are sending signals to your cell. They're in training to that same signal, and they're sending those chemicals to their cells. So that whole sympathetic tone is turning off their ability to rest, repair, and digest, right? You're in balance.
And detox, exactly. Yep.
So the first thing that we do in our spa centers is we get our patients into a parasympathetic state. Now we use a machine to do that, because it's kind of hard to train an animal how to meditate and how to breathe differently. We can do that, but our animals can't. So we use a machine that it surrounds them with a parasympathetic frequencies, and that way they just entrain to that, and it brings them back into a parasympathetic state. And then from there, they can do their salt therapy, they can do their ozone, they can do their lymphatic therapy, they can do their hyperbaric oxygen, they do crystal light fusion therapy, all these different things that are balancing, detoxifying, supporting the innate intelligence of the body to go back to doing its job.
Sounds incredible. Sounds incredible. Okay, I only have a few questions for you left. So I want to talk a little bit about hormone. Well, I should say I operate a hormone replacement therapy clinic, right? And so I know that if humans get hysterectomies earlier in life, they may need some hormone replacement therapy, specifically for bone health, heart health, cognition, memory, whatnot. So is it dangerous for us to be essentially giving animals hysterectomies, like we're neutering and spading these animals at a young age? Can they end up with bone loss and cardiovascular challenges and even memory issues as well? I'm just, again, if we're applying the same concepts that we do from humans to animals, is that a danger? And should we actually not be neutering or spading them at such young of an age? Is my train of thinking correct here? Would you agree with that or not?
I think you did a good job in qualifying the age at which we do it, because there are pros and cons to everything. So the con to not spaying and neutering is we see a higher incidence of, for females, infected uteruses,
Yep.
A lot higher. So we get a
Sure.
lot more pyometrias, which are potentially life-threatening. We see
Okay.
more breast cancer. We see a lot of behavioral problems because you're going to get male, when the female comes into heat, of course, they're bleeding,
Yep.
and you get a lot of males that are trying to jump the fence. Then you have a puppy population that, we're already inundated with too many dogs that we can't find homes for. Although COVID did a great job in helping to empty the shelters, but not everybody is going to take good care of that pet either. So it's not just about getting them into a home, is can these people actually take care of these animals in a sustainable way? And then on the male side, we see a lot of prostatic disease, and we see testicular cancers. Last week, I literally just took a testicular tumor, a dog that had retained testicles. Both of them were retained in the abdomen, so they never descended. And every year the dog was 5. So every year the owner was doing an ultrasound to make sure there wasn't a problem. Guess what? This year there was a problem. We could see a huge testicle in there, and it turned out to be a Sertoli cell tumor. So, there's always going to be the pros and cons.
Sure.
I think that the biggest issue is not just, are these animals getting these diseases because they are spayed or not spayed, but how much of it is related to all the other toxicity that we're doing from processed foods and toxic water. So is it the amount of load that they're getting that is causing them to tip over the edge? Is it the spaying that's a problem and the neutering that's a problem? Or if you leave them intact, is it any better? I think it's such a complex question.
Sure.
And it's answered both in health prevention along with behavioral issues. If anybody has a male dog that's intact and they can control their behavior and they don't let them pee all over the house, there's ways that we can control that. For some people, they're really dedicated and they'll do that. For others, it's just too much for them, and the dog's trying to escape, and they're marking their territory and they're humping. And so I think each case is going to be the individual owner looking at their particular situation. What are they capable of if they don't spay or neuter? What is the behaviors that they're going to need to anticipate and be able to monitor and mitigate? And it's all about mitigation, right? And if they do, can they wait a little bit longer? At least let them get to sexual maturity before they do it. And now,
which means what? Like, how old is that?
Typically closer to a year of age, instead of, in the shelters, they're doing them at 8 weeks.
Yeah.
I think that's not a good idea. Even though there's been 10-year retrospective studies showing that there's no deleterious effects, I don't know that they're measuring for the right things.
Right.
And, back to the question, are we getting bone disease and cardiac disease and incontinence because of the spaying and neutering, or a combination of all these other toxins that they're doing, and no one's even pointing a finger at that?
Right.
So I think what's going to have to happen is, I think we're going to have to clean up the diet, clean up the water, clean up the environment, and then start looking at statistics. How much do we actually see of these diseases in the non-spayed categories or non-neutered categories? And that's going to be the only way that we're really going to be able to make an educated decision. That being said, there are now ovary sparing techniques. There are techniques where just the ovaries are taken out and the uterus is left. So there's a lot of different things that are being tried. Again, pros and cons. So you have to decide on, you have to be a learned pet parent to know what is the right thing to do. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's all going to be dependent on the circumstances and that particular owner and those pets.
Yeah, good answer. Well, hopefully after listening to this, we're all going to be more learned pet parents. As we wrap up the show here, I have to ask what your top longevity tip would be. You can answer for humans or for pets, or maybe it's the same for both.
It's the same for both. It's reducing the toxic load, supporting the organs of elimination, and making sure the essential nutrients are provided so that the body can do its job. It's really that simple. It's, if you want to have longevity, you have to do the things that the centurions do. And included in that list is your attitude, which we didn't really talk about emotions in this particular segment, but Emotions are huge. If you can stay in gratitude and compassion and love and harmony, you are going to have a much healthier, happier life. When you are angry and bitter and shaming and blaming and, doing those kind of things, you're just creating a lot of negative energy. And we all need to take responsibility for our own health, for the health of our pets and our children, and make those decisions. They may not be the easiest ones, but they're really not hard. They're just different. It's just not the fast, cheap, and convenient, but it's so rewarding. For me, I love growing my own food. There's some work involved, but you know what? Every day I'm out there and I'm pulling weeds and I'm trimming stuff and I'm thinking, wow, I'm feeding my microbiome.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I'm taking in trillions of new organisms. Yay me. They're in my nose, they're in my mouth, they're on my skin. And it's a wonderful way of reconnecting back to why are we here on planet Earth? And, we chose to come to Earth School for a reason. And I think it's finding our purpose and our passion and the things that light us up and sharing that with the world so that at the end of the day, we leave the world in a better place than we found it.
I love it. Love it. Tell me where listeners can connect with you and order your dog food as well.
drmarlenesiegel.com is the easiest. It's Dr. Marlene, Marlene, Siegel, S like in Sam, IE, G like in George, EL.com. So drmarlenesiegel.com is the main hub for everything. From there, you can find the food. You can find my hospital site, which I have a ton of blogs, a ton of stories, a lot of videos. So there's just a lot of information. It's all free. And then, of course, the holistichealingvet.com, where they can download the 6 steps to healing, which we just talked about. I think it's 5 steps to healing because the 6th is the emotional part, and I didn't put that in the ebook. But that's really that. Those are the keys.
Awesome free gift.
And so much for including our fur babies in your world. You have to do that. And I'm so grateful that we are really bringing the fur babies in, because I personally believe that they are the angelic realm that is here to guide us, help us, teach us, encourage us, and make this the world that we intended it to be.
Well, this has been incredible. I'm sure my listeners are going to just gain so much information and going to want to connect with you further. And I got to convince my husband to convert Lily over to your dog food.
Super easy. And yeah,
You'll have to listen to
this. So super easy.
I look forward to checking that out and also getting my free download as well. So thank you so much today for all the time you spent coming on the show and motivating us pet parents that we really can do better for our fur babies and helping equip us with the tools to do such. So thanks again. This was awesome.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. Bye.